Welcome to class 3, the dialectics of the minimalist and the Baroque, the fabulous, the amazing, the incredible, the talented, the beautiful Alexander Bard. Go.
Well, we'll see about that. I'm going to be very human today. Let's put it that way. I'm going to try to tie the knots and get all of this together. But you all know that we're early into the project. There's a part of me that really wants to start writing as quickly as possible because I could literally start writing and develop the ideas even further. But there's also a much more mature side of me, having written 6 books already, that says that no, wait until the seismology comes into the picture. We're going to talk about seismology today. Wait until the whole thing explodes, and then you start writing intensely instead. So I'm waiting for that volcanic eruption to occur, which will make me start writing a lot probably while I'm doing it. So there's still work to do. Just on a personal level, I would say this week is the week when I started hating Jacques Lacan. And I don't mean hating Jacques Lacan. I literally don't mean that. I mean that I'm finished with him. I'm reading Lacan probably for the last time, and I think whatever Lacan could teach us, probably at least for me, was finished by the time I wrote Cross and Event. And that's interesting because that means that Lacan is not really part of mysticism at all. I always say that Lacan is an amazing thinker because he takes Western nihilism all to the very end. He's the ultimate materialist. He's the ultimate atheist. He's the ultimate secular guy. He's completing the European Enlightenment without worrying about its problems. You know, he doesn't care about Hitler and Stalin. He just goes on, and then he finishes the whole product in a way, and he does it beautifully. And that's why Deleuze and Guattari, in their opposition to Lacan already in the 1970s, comes from this sort of very anarchist, rebellion against the father. That's the obvious thing. But there's something more to it. There's a lot more to dig into. And I think with Deleuze and Guattari's nomadology, which I've inherited from them and developed further, just like I stole their idea of schizoanalysis and developed it further, both first as a practice and later writing about it. And because these were unfinished projects. But these projects are much more Nietzschean, but without Lacan. Much more Nietzschean without Lacan. I think that's important to remember. So being finished with a lot of that, knowing it a little too well, one of the things then that I want to talk about here is, for example, Lacan doesn't think multiplicity all the way through, and obviously his most famous disciple Badiou did exactly that instead, which is also a response against Lacan or do something else with him. But I'd say the other part of Lacan is that he doesn't think time. You would think he would because he's Hegelian. He certainly thinks dialectics, and he thinks dialectical processes, but he doesn't think time. So I think he ends up with the same problem that happened to 20th century existentialism. The problem was that Heidegger talked about Heidegger's subject, and Sartre talked about Sartre's subject. Camus talked about Camus' subject. And that's exactly when we go back to these guys today. We read Sartre as a novelist. We even read the drama written by Sartre. We do the same with Camus. But we don't read Sartre's philosophy any longer because it doesn't make any sense. It's so clearly French, white male, bourgeois, Paris, cafes. And in Sartre's case, the fact that he was a shithead because he actually played with the Nazis, and just like Coco Chanel, he stayed in Paris and was glamorous and all that. He was not part of the resistance. And he had to fight really hard to get back in again, and basically took Heidegger with him and saved Heidegger from Nazism because they were the same two assholes, right? So Sartre struggled probably with a lot of that, which is just very self-obsessed and narcissistic and not that interesting. And this is the problem why existentialism imploded. So Nietzsche used himself as an example. That's why Nietzsche's philosophy is so poetic. But Nietzsche never claimed that his subjectivity was universal. And this was the problem with existentialism in the 20th century. And the way to kill it very, very quickly and easily is just to apply time, which we did last week. We did by putting the virtual unconscious out there as ahead of, as the future, as subsistence. And then just putting that tiny, tiny momentalism we talked about last week, putting the tiny momentum is where subjectivity really occurs, which is a subconscious state. By the way, Alex Ebert loves these ideas. You probably figured out by now. So in the subconscious state, and that's the only state that ever exists. And that's now, and that's mythical, and that's where we interact with the world. Meaning that knowledge can never be anything but intuitive. If you think about knowledge like facts, like zeros and ones you've accumulated, then you built the library. You haven't built the brain. You're not emotionally intelligent. A library is not emotionally intelligent. A library is literally just zeros and ones. Computers are modern libraries. They're not alive. You pump electricity to them, the machines, and they accumulate zeros and ones and then process zeros and ones in ways to be programmed to process zeros and ones. That's not how the brain works. That's not how the mind works. That's not what it means to be human. To be human is fundamentally to be emotionally intelligent. That term has been misused, but I love the term emotional intelligence so much that it really is one of the possible alternative titles of the Zufism book. Because today, to defend being human means to defend exactly that. And that's the one universal thing that all human beings have in common, not their existential experience. We don't even have the existential experience in common with ourselves. We're different from one moment to the next. The Alexander that I am at one given momentum is dead the next momentum. Then another Alexander is suddenly born, and then a third Alexander appears the next momenta. And that's exactly why you see this very clearly when you ask yourself, well, was I the same person 10 years ago? And you go, oh, of course I wasn't. I was totally different 10 years ago. Well, that's just a gradual shift that happens all the time, from one momentum to the next. And that's how we change all the time. So we're born and we die constantly. And by looking at existentialism that way, it's kind of shocking that none of these guys really thought of it. Not even Heidegger. He did Being and Time. He did Sein und Zeit. But he didn't really think time first, which I said provocatively is like, what if we think time as the subject and then start relating to it as if it were the object for time to conquer? Because then we can see this movement from the virtual abstinence into the potential existence that then drops into the actual subsistence, which we can only circulate and contemplate on and try to integrate in hindsight. Consciousness is the way the brain or the mind tries to make sense of the world in hindsight. It's how we try to incorporate the past into a worldview where there's also room for our self-view. That's all there is to it. So that's what consciousness is. So we went through that last week. So what I want to do today is to go into the different dialectical relationships we're working with here. You know that when you do philosophy, you work with dialectics all the time. So what would it mean here? What are the different dialectical relationships? Well, the really interesting thing that happened this morning was that I was podcasting with Patrick Schumacher together with Owen and Raven, our dear friends. And we're obviously podcasting on architecture as its own emergence vector. What if architecture is architecture for its own sake and nothing else? Which is an idea that Patrick Schumacher has defended for like 20 years. And his time has come. He's one of the greatest architects in the world. And he's just amazing. And he's taken over Saudid architects. And we all love Saudid. I mean, Owen, Raven, and I are like fanboys and fangirls totally to Patrick because of it. But the striking thing was that he challenged me and Owen Raven today to say that as a secular, atheist, Western enlightened person who has incorporated just about everything in architectural history, who's now finally realized architecture is its own emergence vector, it should be only judged through its own merit, architecture should be interesting as architecture for architects and nothing else. It's nothing outside of that. And once he's created that emergence vector around architecture, then he says that, well, obviously, historically, architecture has been more than that. And we challenged him and said, well, how about religion and spirituality? He's interested in philosophy. He doesn't realize that philosophy, religion, spirituality are three sides of the same dialectical relationship. So we challenged him, he challenged us. And the question I had today, which it's a perfect example for the new book, you should get a hint of how this works, is the funny thing with space, when we construct a building, is that we tend to put the profane and the public at the outside. Imagine a temple. The profane and the public is on the outside. The further you walk into the building and push yourself through different membranes, and you leave what Andrew and I work is called the sutra, and you go towards the tantra, the further inside you go into the building, the closer you get to the private and the sacred. And Patrick was just like, wow, yes, 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 yes. Because I said, you still build in the tradition, the modern tradition of the cult of transparency. Like all space should be open to everybody. Everything should be as open as you could possibly imagine. Anybody should walk into the building anywhere, and it should have public access all doors. But in reality, if you want to do a really amazing building that really has religious and spiritual values attached to it. That means it won't be nihilistic. It won't be just a sensation at best where you go, wow, oh, what the architect come up with. And then it just becomes like, like a shopping mall, And obviously, Patrick and Saidi architects have built, for example, fantastic airport terminals in India that both O and I have visited and loved to bits. And so we had a starting point where actually Patrick and Saidi architects had really subconsciously, again, intuitively, he argues for intuition constantly in his work, Patrick. All major artists always go for intuition. There's no, that's exactly why AI can't create the art, because AI works only with zeros and ones from the past and then operates toward average means. It will always look mediocre. It will always look mediocre. It won't be artistically challenging or interesting or transformative. And Patrick knows that very well. So he obviously had already built buildings or designed buildings that had a religious sphere to them. Because the one thing that is really religious these days is, of course, an airport terminal. It's where you check in and check out of your pilgrimage. It's where you become a nomad. It's where you're being flown by birds across the sky to other cultures, to visit them, learn from them, experience them, compare yourself, be local in your locality, but also be global in realizing the people in other parts of the world are just like you. So, yeah, so that made sense. And therefore, we can go into one of these dialectics, which is private and profane. It's not identical to sacred, no, private and public. Sorry, private and public. It's not identical to sacred, profane, but related. So sacred is on the side of private. Public is on the side of profane. And then in the history of religions, as we return to religion, that means the profane and the public has oriented itself towards folk religion and towards polytheism. Also, we call it iconology, which is the religion of everyday people. The religion of everyday people is that you go and worship your own archetype. You try to find your own archetype. You go and talk to somebody who's older than you of that archetype. If that person is dead, even better, because that's a perfect role model, a saint, an icon. And then the icon speaks to God on your behalf. He has to. You never talk directly to God, because that's exactly what nihilism is. If I would talk directly to God, I'd be nihilistic in 2 seconds. It's precisely by accessing God only indirectly that I'm totally immune to nihilism right away. So this is interesting in the sense of the work we've done before about the Tantra and the Sutra divide that this returns. Now, this also means we have a question that we wanted to address in this course, and it's aesthetics. And this is what Owen, Raven, and I are working with, especially together with Patrick. The minimalist versus the Baroque. Can you suddenly see how this relates exactly to what we just said? The Baroque is on the side of folk religion, on iconology. What does iconology look like? What does polytheism look like? Go to fucking India or turn on the fucking American television set. All you see is like thousands of colors and faces and loads of things and blah, 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 and attempts to sensationalize and all of it. So the great way to look at something like Instagram, if you want to look at it as a collective art project, in a way it is to look at Instagram as polytheistic, iconological, Baroque. It's all those things in one. Then when guys like Andrew and me go into mysticism, we turn our backs on the Baroque. That's precisely when we leave the Baroque and we go towards minimalism. Because the further you go inside the temple and the more membranes you get through, and the more prepared you are, you've done your job, you've done your work, and you suddenly get access to the innermost sanctum of the temple, it's absolutely minimalist. Whatever it is, it's absolutely minimalist. And that's exactly why along the Silk Road triad, you had folk religion in China, you had folk religion in Japan, Shintoism, you had folk religion in India, which is Hinduism, and out of these traditions came the mystical schools and the new sort of more advanced spiritual schools that attempted to leave the local to go towards what united people across barriers and therefore go from local to global, go to universal. The way to go to universal is to drop the Baroque. I would propose here, the Baroque is fundamentally iconological and the local. Any village in the world will go Baroque in no time at all. The way it will artistically express itself, what kind of rituals it will have, will go Baroque. It will mix everything. It will steal something from the other village and then throw something away to the other village. And probably it will throw out a few daughters or sons as well in exchange with the other village. So you have a little, nicer blend of blood to fuck in your own village, etc. But you will certainly throw all these things together in a mess. And this is why Hinduism is religion. But this is why we're going towards Hinduism as folk religion again. And in popular culture, you have the Baroque everywhere. But the Baroque is perfectly okay. The Baroque works because the Baroque is then also on the side of reproduction. It's on the side of reproduction. It's on the side of the matrix. It's what you're born into. You're born into daycare centers and your mother throwing toys at you, and everything about childhood is Baroque. Blah, 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 50,000 things, because you're supposed to learn and find your own way and imitate the grown-ups and make friends. And, all those things you're supposed to learn in a playful way, hopefully, not getting beaten up because then you become a Putin, but, play your way through childhood. All those things are in the Baroque. Therefore, to grow old and to become an adult is the journey from the Baroque towards the minimalist. And if you think about it, then you go all the way to your own funeral. And at least in Sweden now, we try to practice secular funerals, try to find some kind of a new spirituality. We acknowledge when people die, they really, really die. The grief is total. We go towards absolute grief, which Hegel would have endorsed. When we're trying to do these things in Sweden right now, the only way to confront the grief and the mourning you suffer from when somebody you loved has died is to go minimalist. Remove things. Take everything away. And that explains, for example, if you watch the movie The Brutalist recently, why brutalism comes out of architects that came out of Auschwitz. It sounds absurd because we're thinking of Auschwitz like the sort of minimalist place. It's been designed that when we go and visit it. But Auschwitz is the most Baroque thing ever. It's so absurd. That's intensely Baroque, but dark Baroque. It's just a dark version of the Baroque. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's not minimalist at all. There's nothing minimalist about throwing 20,000 bodies on top of each other and put them to fire. It's not minimalist at all. That's what minimalism is. Minimalism is all the way down to the one death and let that death happen when it happens. That's minimalism for you. So as you go into mysticism, what's interesting is that the more I talk to mystics who throw tons of things at me, like mysticism is this and this and this and this, and the more Baroque it looks, the less it looks like mysticism to me, because mysticism to me is minimalism. And for me, I've told you this story before, for me personally, that was to, for the first time, go to Zoroastrian fire temple in Yazd in Iran. Yazd is the capital of Zoroastrian culture. And to go into this 3,000-year-old temple, basically, and meditate in front of the fire. And then discovering in Japan, at Lake Biwa, doing Rinzai-sen, that exactly the same architecture was dominating a Zen rock garden, except there was no fire, but there was a symmetry. So minimalism obviously is closely tied to mysticism, whereas the Baroque is tied to pop religion, folk religion, popular expression, and is much more on the side of the matrix. That means the direction towards minimalism is phallic. The direction is phallic. It's the phallus that sort of tempts us to drop things, go minimalist, get rid of things that are not important because they got a mission to fulfill. Then at the very end, death returns. I mean, death, birth returns, and therefore the matrix comes back in. I've always told you that the matrix or the matriarch is the beginning and the end of the journey. Birth and death are always on the feminine side, but the masculine side is what both men and women strive for, to impress, to be something in front of. And the way to do it throughout your life is to drop things, that weren't important. And that's exactly why you're wise when you're 64, hopefully. You've learned a few things. You're less interested in a lot of things because you know they were not really relevant to your archetype. They weren't really there with your mission. And the thing, finally, when you're like in your 70s or 80s, and you're really good at things, you can walk into the room, point exactly what's important, and skip everything else. So what the mystic tries to do is basically to jump the queue towards the wisdom of the dying person. And that is called harvatat in Zoroastrianism. That means completeness. Completeness is or as Alex Ebert says, quoting Hegel, complete saturation, complete wholeness, like a completely saturated life, a completely experienced, lived life, a life that is tired of its own existence because it has nothing more to contribute, it's nothing more to experience. It can at best only leave something behind, and a heritage, possibly, especially if it's written these days, but it can leave something behind if that's useful for the community. Civilization is built on the fact that we can leave things behind. But in itself, the subjectivity by then is completely full. Habitat's complete. And then one little drop to a saturated bathtub, and you got a flood, the tipping point. And this is why I'm interested in how the tipping point really, as a metaphor, is the beginning of a revolution. I call it seismology. So it's like that little tipping point kickstarted the entire fucking volcano, and you got the fucking earthquake. And that shift is emergence. That shift is the birth of the new. That means death is complete saturation. You drop one little drop of water into a bath that was completely saturated, and you get a flood, meaning the bathtub dies. The subjectivity of the bathtub dies, but it's now nutrition for a new life to be born. And that's the process we call cephalization. So what has been nurtured inside the membrane and been allowed to grow has now come to the point where the cephalized entity is becoming its own entity. It doesn't understand that yet. It doesn't have its own subjectivity yet. Nature forces it out of the womb. Nature forces it out of the membrane. So the membrane opens because the time has come, and the entire entity, the most valuable part of the entire membranic system, is being pushed out because it now has its own membrane. And then, like Magdalena has pointed out in our work here in these sessions, the umbilical cord is what ties the two together. And culture, the beginning of culture has to go in and cut the umbilical cord so you can let go of the cephalized entity and you got a new being. And very often women died in these processes, biologically speaking, because they sacrificed their lives doing it. So it's very violent, all of this. It's very violent, but it's exactly the same thing on the masculine side, where the soldier walks into the battlefield behind a flag, fights all they can, dies on the battlefield, but manages to expand the territory. So the membrane has expanded. Whenever somebody says they're interested in the military because they're interested in defense, they're lying. There's no energy in defense. There's no energy in defense at all. The energy is in the aggressive attack, in the expansive attitude. You got to go into the fight. You want to expand it, because if you don't expand the territory, then you will certainly lose the war. The same thing, women give birth to more children. Why? Historically, give birth to more children. Why? Because children die. Children might not reach mature age. They might give birth to 5 children, 3 die, 2 are grown-ups, and that's a success. So the reason why women historically give birth to more than 2 children and are honored for doing it, for creating large families, is simply because it's better to have an expansive mindset if you're going to keep something. Keep it for the next generation. You got to expand to keep it for the next generation. That is a really, really important insight where we're going to start doing philosophical seismology or speculative seismology. So the minimalist and the Baroque. Then we have the esoteric and the exoteric, clearly shown here. The esoteric is therefore on the side of the minimalist. So I'm adamant about this. I mean, it's an hypothesis. I certainly will drive it for the next 3 years. I might be wrong, but it's certainly a hypothesis that I'm going to dig into in the book. I'm really, really interested in why spiritual mysticism always goes towards the minimalist, and why it tries to get rid of the Baroque of the outside world. Why do you stop listening to pop music and listen to jazz music when you become a mystic? Why? Because you really get into the music. You get into music fully. The music is no longer just a soundtrack at the back of your head, or a sonic tape, sonic wallpaper. No, the music is you're in the music. You're really in the music, or you're really in the art, or you're really in sexual intercourse, or you're really, really engaged with something. That's what's mystical. So you really, really engage. You eat food in a way you've never eaten food before. You really find every little nuance of the taste. Luxury as a concept is based on this. It's always inherent from mystics. So you go all the way into that, and that's minimalism. Minimalism really is the explicit study of a tiny little phenomenon to really understand what that phenomenon is, to then get the larger picture. So the esoteric and the esoteric is there as well. This goes to philosophy and religion as dialectical opposition. Kind of weird. Isn't religion just a practice and philosophy the thinking behind it? Well, not historically, because what was always there was spirituality. Spirituality is basically just the fantasy world human beings are forced to live in from the day they're born. The fantasy about mother, the fantasy about father, being opponent to mother, being opponent to father, all those things, all those fantasies we live in that eventually are crushed and replaced by new fantasies, and the whole phenomenological process of replacing fantasies with new fantasies all the time, and hopefully the new fantasy works better than the old one, so you don't make the same stupid mistake again. So you learn and your memory grows as you grow older, and therefore when you grow older, you know things, right? That entire process you go through throughout your life, that process is spirituality. Religion is then basically just the name of what you do when you get larger populations than the sociant. It doesn't make any sense to speak about religion when we're concerned with the sociant. Tribal life does not have religion. Tribal life is collective spirituality. But as soon as we, from the Bronze Age, process and event, as soon as the Bronze Age arrives, we have to start imagining what can connect larger populations. This is when we need the mystics too. So the shamanic practice for the sociant becomes shamanic practice between sociants, because the shamans are already the ambassadors to the outside world. They're the diplomats who talk to the gods and the demons. They're the diplomats who negotiate with the forefathers more than anything. The diplomats who negotiate with the forces of nature so we can get rain, we need rain, we get sun, we need sun. All those things are ascribed to the shamans, and we might even kill them if they don't deliver. The shamans therefore go between the social and the outside world. Therefore, they become the first connectors between communities. So when we have to expand, the shamans are central. So the priest becomes the first absolutely necessary role, and the priest is nothing but a shaman in a dress. As soon as the shaman walks from the borderline between socials into the sociant, he does it with the respect and the acknowledgement and the wisdom and the status of a priest. The priest then has to find somebody who can defend the community on the male side, and therefore is the king of the battlefield, and that is the chief. Then he has to find that one woman who all the other women center around, who is the mother of birth and the daughter of death, whatever you want to call it. That character is the matriarch. The matriarch then becomes the queen of the community, and preferably the priest, which they often do, marry the queen, the matriarch, who is the queen of reproduction, with the king, who's the king of the battlefield. And therefore, the priest comes into the room when men are sacrificing their lives on the battlefield for the sociant, blesses them and says, "You're sacred. We'll remember you. You're sacred because you sacrificed your life for this community. You can't do anything greater than that." And the same thing with women. So you got the priestess coming in and said, "Okay, you're a sacred woman. If you die, if your placenta kills you to save the child, then the child will be still here. The community will adopt the child. The child will be a holy child. Shall be a holy child. And you'll be honored forever because you sacrificed your life for the sociant." That's spirituality. That's clear. That works. I've seen it firsthand, and you can always with data anthropology probably prove it today. As soon as you got a community that has a strong enough memory, enough isolate, you'll see these behavior patterns appear anywhere in the world. It's just deeply human. But then you go to the larger population, then religion has to be invented, and religion is fundamentally organized, and it's fundamentally storytelling, and it's fundamentally the story about how the different tribes relate to one another and therefore have a shared ancestor or a shared forefather. And that's how religion develops, to keep the peace for as long as possible. To be priest, to be shaman is to talk to the outside world. To be priest is to try to prolong the peace for as long as possible until people are so stupid and frustrated they start killing each other anyway. He tried to save the life of the king for as long as possible until people killed the king out of frustration. He's tried to save the life of the queen for as long as possible until people try to kill the queen out of frustration. So it's basically just to contain the frustrations of the community by giving them a story they can believe in that unites the different tribes. And that's exactly why we get different types of religion coming out of permanent settlements and farming culture. We get different religions coming out of mountainous areas. My favorites are all from mountainous areas because they do psychedelics, but the landscape itself and how you survive over time sets the tone for what kind of religion you develop. And when Catholicism and Christianity didn't really fit with the cold climate of Northern Europe, they invented Protestantism. Because it's probably easier to contain communities over time, especially over 6 months winters and things like that. So you could literally see the differences in religion appearing because of the landscape shaped. Now, here's the next thing. Once you start thinking empirefully, religion is not good enough. Why? Because religion is just storytelling. You tell people stories. Religion is therefore, as you can see now, located in the Baroque, in the exoteric, in the sutra, in the outside world. Religion is basically the priest telling people the story they need to hear to stay together. Tell them the story they need to hear to reproduce. Tell them the story they need to hear to defend themselves and expand their territory if they can. Tell the story just to keep it up, keep it going. Save the library, save the ancestor, keep the root of the phallus, keep our history. Keep the people together. Whatever that is, the priest does. And if the priest has to operate together with another priest from another tribe to get a larger population, if they can create a story that both believe, then we can create an even larger population. We go all the way towards empire. And that's the dream of empire. So philosophy then must be introduced simply because you got to have an elite, a glue. You need more than shamans. You got to have a shamanic elite that live like priests do. You have a priesthood. And therefore, mysticism is necessary. Because the moment religion discovers that the people we tell stories is there as a sutric truth, a mythical truth to keep the world together. In reality, truth is logos and pathos. It's not mythos. But we can't tell people the logos because they don't have the brains to comprehend it. It later became science. And we can't throw pathos at people because that's just total anarchy and bloodshed. When all reality is exposed to people, they go to war straight away. They can't just control themselves. So we can't do that. But we can contain it. And we contain people who are trained to be able to handle it. This is the journey towards mysticism. This is the journey towards the holy of the holies. This is the journey towards the inner sanctum of the temple. And only in the inner sanctum of the temple, you have to enter with mystikos, what goes beyond the public story, what goes beyond the public. And this is why this is associated with the minimalist, associated with the esoteric, and its philosophy. So mysticism is the birth of philosophy. It's literally what mystics do. They practice philosophy. So if regular people practice religion, then the mystics practice philosophy. If they don't, they're not mystics. And believe me, 99% of people who call themselves mystics weren't. We have a lot of rubbish to kill. But to really, really understand mysticism, be mystical about mysticism as a concept, this is where philosophy comes in. So you get spirituality, you get religion, you leave religion with Sutric, and then you go into the world of philosophy. And the world of philosophy, as we know from the Persians and the Greeks and the Chinese and the Indians who invented philosophy, was that discourse that occurred between the mystics. And it was intensely tied to deep mystical experiences. And sex was what you did with women if you were a man, and with men if you were a woman. But the psychedelic and spiritual practice was done one sex at a time, separated from the other sex, because sex was its own thing. And then you went to this deep state, we can call them psychedelic states, and you had deep, deep experiences. You did contemplation, meditation, you took psychedelic drugs. All the things you did was to create bonds that were so strong that these bonds held the inner sanctum together, and nobody could attack the inner sanctum and nobody could affect it. In Persian philosophy, this is called barsam. You spell it barsam, but barsam, I call it barsam. This is the barsam. This is the bond which is so strong that it's occurred through mystical experiences and is so strong you cannot get through it. It's not marriage, which is still a contract or anything like that. This is the real contract. This is the contract of Mithras. This is the contract that is so intense it cannot be unbounded. It's a contract until and beyond death. It's a transcendent contract. And this is central to mysticism. So we got philosophy and religion sorted out. That means we also sorted out monotheism and polytheism. Monotheism is philosophy. The clumsy monotheisms we got, for example, Christianity and Islam, they were basically imitating. They were imitating mystical practices. They were imitating Mithraism more than anything. So they were imitating Mithraism, Zoroastrianism, and Jewish cults that came out of the Levant, and they constructed pop religions that supposed to be universal. And as soon as they'd done that, they started splitting up. So there was Muhammad and Ali, and who the hell were you supposed to worship? And you got the Trinity, you got the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And then people said, well, we don't even like the Father, Son, and the Spirit. We want to have Father, Son, and Virgin Mary. We don't even get what the Spirit is. Well, then you're the spirit. Okay, we're okay with being the spirit. We can't worship ourselves. Okay, we have Father, Son, whatever that is. Yeah, it's the older man and the younger man, and that's basically an imitation of priest and chief. So priest is father and son is chief. And then, of course, Virgin Mary becomes the matriarch. And that is Christianity. Practice Christianity for 2,000 years has been the Virgin Mary as the third. So you get exact replicas of nomadological splits, but you don't have mono. That is why so many mystics get frustrated, because here's the next opposition, the opposition between the one and the many. Right, the many is the sutra, the many is the Baroque, the many is the outside, the many is the exoteric. That's exactly why the journey towards the esoteric, towards the mystic, is the journey towards the one. And we talked about it last week. I laid it out for you. So the one in this case is discovering your subjectivity as a one, and then discovering you can actually get rid of the subjectivity, walk out of it, walk into it again. So it's like you're creating a separate part of the subjectivity, which is kind of an as-subject. We call it as-subject. So subject without a subjectivity. So the as-subject basically walks into pure experience. Mystical tradition, Zen, Buddhism. And you'll probably agree that Vajrayana Buddhism has both of these aspects. The pure experience is the meditation towards a state where self is dissolved, the no self, as subject. So you can either go there, you can either go experience that. If you don't know you're doing it, you probably experience this complete and utter neurosis, but it's not. You go towards that. So you're replacing your subjectivity with the one. That's what it is. Then you go back to dialectical subject. It's kind of shaky there. Well, then you go the other way, which the Zen don't, Vajrayana does, Zoroastrianism does, and that's the tradition that I call the infinite now. Wrote about in the Synthesis book. I was very much interested in the absolute total bliss I could experience on psychedelics and, partying with my best friends or whatever. When I go into that mode where I enjoy life to its absolute fullest. I enjoy being the age I am. I enjoy being the person I am. I enjoy my life journey completely. I enjoy my archetype. I can't believe I'm so fucking lucky. It's unbelievable. And that's the infinite now. And when you go into the full scale of the infinite now, all the way into the infinite now. Freud and Lacan were terrified of it. That's why they're lacking it. They're too Zen. Because Freud basically said, I'm skeptical about the oceanic feeling. And the misunderstanding in Freudian theory and Lacanian theory is that the oceanic feeling is the longing back into the matrix, longing back to the 9 months of wonderful problemlessness you had in the womb. But wait a second. There's something wrong with that theory because there is no subject there. The point with the infinite now is that your first subject has experienced subjectivity, and then you can truly enjoy the infinite now. And that is the Sufi and the Vajrayan explosion into the one, dissolution into the one, absolute bliss, being one with the divine. So these are the ultimate experiences, and this is what we talked about last week. So then everything else you experience phenomenologically is on that path in between the two. We're arriving exactly between the two, what I call the perverted position between the neurosis and the psychosis, because obviously the other two are divine neurosis, divine psychosis. So you go into divine neurosis, divine psychosis. I should write that down. It's a good term. You go there, you arrive at the dialectical subject in between. And that's what subjectivity is. It's a problem-solving function that has still problems to solve that it hasn't solved yet. And it can't help itself, but it's enjoying solving problems all the time. You go to bed at night, you got problems to solve tomorrow. Yeah, you're not going to die because you're going to wake up the next morning remembering what problems you had to solve this day. And that's the next day. And problem-solving mechanisms go on. And that's why you have consciousness. Consciousness is how your brain throws you back to your own history and you learn from the past so you don't make mistakes you did before. And you love that process. It's the learning process of life. We love it because we grow with it. We expand with it. And then you can solve problems tomorrow you never thought you could solve before. And the problem you couldn't solve yesterday, you could solve it the next day because you've learned something new. Okay, so that whole problem-solving mechanism is essentially what subjectivity does. And it's there. And it doesn't have any other purpose? Not really, because subject is subject to the sociant. What is alive is the sociant. What thrives is the sociant. The sociant was there before you. The sociant there after you. The sociant is God. The tribe is God. You're just an expression of the tribe. You're a temporary expression of the tribe. You're born, you live, and you die. And your life is a now. What was before you were born can only subsist. History prior to you being born, you cannot imagine anything like that because you weren't there. So the past before your life subsists. The future beyond your death. You know you're going to die one day. And you have to imagine about life after death. You don't know when you're going to die. It's kind of squeezy to know that I probably am going to live another 30 years. So I may, but it's 100 years from now, I know I'm going to be dead, right? So I can think about subsistence. I can imagine something 100 years from now that, of course, I will not be part of, and that's okay. That's okay. But the sociant that I'm part of, I cannot imagine the sociant having an origin and an end. I imagine the sociant as being eternally there, was there all along, will always be there. And that's why my projection onto the sociant is the divine. And I'm subject to the sociant. I'm a slave to the sociant. I'm happily a slave to the sociant. I'm even willing to die for the sociant. That's what men and women are. So you get that. So then we come to the next question. This gets really interesting. I'm glad we have Max around today, because this is the interesting question of decentralization, centralization. And I'm not going to talk it from a sort of political, ideological perspective, because it's a very, very cute topic there. Max and I have been preaching to you guys for years that this is the biggest topic of the 21st century. Because once we're locked into a tyrannical police state, we don't see any way out. Once that happens, it's disaster. Possibly worse than atomic bombs. It's the end of freedom. It's the endless repetition of a nightmare, like dictatorships always are. So we want to avoid that. So that's where we're advocates of decentralization, because historically right now, where the paradigm is located, paradigmatically, going into digital age, it's a totally open question if digital is going to be a nightmare, or if digital is going to realize all our dreams. And it's going to be for everybody, either of the two directions. The Chinese have decided where they're going, certainly. They go for the Confucian nightmare. And I'm more Taoist than ever. And I wish all my Taoist friends in China good luck. And I love Taiwan and all that. But if Taoism can't win over Confucianism in China, they're done. And if we can't win over the heritage of Plato, we can win over Platonism here, we will get Hitler and Stalin. That could easily happen. We even got a Boy Farrell copy of Hitler and Stalin right now in Washington, D.C., if you haven't noticed. At least he's stupid. Cartman in South Park cannot be as evil as Hitler and Stalin, because he's too stupid to be as evil as they were. They were more calculating than he was. And that's exactly why dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping and the mullahs around are fucking Trump in the ass. Right? So that's the madness of the whole thing. Decentralization, centralization, how do they operate here? You would think, thinking architecture, you would automatically think that if you go into the temple towards the center, you're going towards centralization. That is precisely the mistake Plato and Confucius are making. It's exactly the other way around. Centralization is the priest standing on the steps of the temple, giving the entire population of the empire one universal story about how they must stay together as an empire, or else anarchy will happen. That's centralization. No. So you leave that and you go into the tantric, into the esoteric, into the minimalist, way from religion into philosophy, way into monotheism, proper monotheism, into the one. You go towards the sacred. You go towards the private. All those are towards decentralization. Decentralization is sacred. Decentralization is your privacy. Decentralization is minimalist. Decentralization means you go towards being on your own, realizing you have absolute freedom looking into the future, and that freedom has not been stolen from you. That freedom is still yours. Once the now happens, all freedom is gone. The present is precisely where freedom collapses into determinism. It's where freedom collapses into law. That's exactly what the now is. But when you're fantasizing about the future, when you're virtualizing yourself, looking towards yourself in the future, when you're like me, say, I've got at least 30 years to go before I get demented or whatever, and I'm going to do philosophy all those 30 years, and I'm going to enjoy my life, and I'm going to go into pure experience, I'm going to get the infinite now. For as long as my body can take me there, I'm going to go there. I'm going to enjoy all of it. I'm going to live life to its fullest, and I'm going to die happy with a smile on my face, be tired of it all. That's my ambition. Now, if I want to do that and go into that, decentralization is going to be absolute requirement for me. So I want to add to Max and my political ideological struggle for decentralization. This is a deeply spiritual struggle. And it is the struggle of the mystic. It's precisely by leaving the sociant, walking into the wilderness, that the shaman returns to his freedom. And this is what you're doing. You're not walking into the center of the social. The center of the social is the inner arm of the matriarch and the women. That's the matriarchy. The outer arm of the social is the patriarchy, the realm of the men, the hunters and the warriors. No, when you walk into mysticism, when you walk into the temple, into the center, you walk out of the social. Women walk out of the inner realm to the outer realm. Join men in the outer realm. They walk out of the social into the wilderness, into the borderland, into the not knowing where you're going, into risk taking, into all those things you go into the world of art, into the world of wild experimentation, into a world where the only knowledge you have access to is absolute intuition. There's no other way to handle yourself. You cannot calculate anything. You have no idea where you're going. That's going into mysticism, and that is going towards decentralization. If that sounds counterintuitive, listen to the conversation once again, because I don't have to repeat it. You can listen to this again if you want to. But the point here is that decentralization is what the mystics are looking for. And that's exactly what the mystics are leaving the communities, going out to the wilderness, basically telling people that, yeah, I'm mad, I'm totally crazy, just leave me alone, okay? Because they're not crazy at all. But when they're confronted with people coming from the Sosyont, being taught the sutra, the only way they can be interpreted is as crazy wisdom. Crazy wisdom is the name for somebody with a sutric background running into a tantric environment. That's what crazy wisdom is, the name of the wisdom at the very core of the temple. Crazy wisdom is mysticism. And crazy wisdom is fundamentally decentralization. So decentralization comes from the core of the temple, going all the way out towards the audience. And the thing to warn people about with centralization, if we're going towards digital age turning, is that the first thing a digital age tyrant will do is to kill the shamans. And if you kill the shamans, we don't have any diplomats or ambassadors, talk to gods and the demons, and we're done. You get rid of the very, very people you need the most when you got a crisis. That's exactly what tyrants do all the time. Alex Navalny. Maybe he's the last Christian. I know Alex Navalny was Christian, and more than anything, Alex Navalny believed that what Russia needed more than anything was a Christian martyr who allowed himself to die in the Gulag, to then forever force all Russians to remember that they had killed the Christ figure. He literally did that. You can read his book. And he did it beautifully. He did it. He just used that aspect of the shamanic. But I was killed. Are you better off now with Putin without me? Don't ever do this again. Don't ever have a Putin ever again. Whatever you have, I don't care about me. Alex Navalny was not a power play. Don't care about me. Shamanic. Don't care about me. Whatever you have the next time, don't ever have a Putin again. As Russians, you deserve better than this shit. So again, decentralization versus centralization. So we got the bottom line. This also brings us into the last few minutes before we let you guys in, whatever questions you might have today, is to go back to Barton Söderqvist, to the prior books, the first three books, and the sort of innovative young dialectics we developed. Partly influenced by Hegel, partly in opposition with Hegel, to Hegel with Deleuze, etc. We developed three different forms of dialectics that you can see now repeated. The first one is eternalism versus mobilism. And the idea is very simple. The idea is that if we do take that everything is in flux seriously, okay, then everything is mobile. Nothing stands still. Even in physics, it requires too much energy for something to be frozen. It's better to let things move around. So things move around, vacuum energy, whatever you call it in physics, but that's just a metaphor. But if anything fundamentally moves around, then everything is fundamentally mobile. That means what the human being does in a Kantian way is that we phenomenologically experience the flux, but we can't make sense of it because it's a psychosis. That's what a psychosis is. It's a lack of center. So we have to invent a center. And that center we're inventing is called eternalization. So you eternalize something, and because you eternalize one thing, you can start with world or self, probably one of the two. You eternalize something, you got a starting point, so then you can have the other one. And if you did world, you're probably going to do self next, because self and world are just two different coins, two different sides of the same coin. Or mother and child are going to be two sides of the same coin. Then father, mother, two sides of the same coin. And dialectical processes kickstart from that. So it's a way of really pedagogically explaining how dialectics works, both before and after Hegel. So the dialectics of eternalism and mobilism can be used here too. That means mysticism is to dare to go into mobilism as it is, to re-eternalize. Mysticism is a de-eternalization process. It's daring to let go of eternalizations, knowing eternalizations are probably false. And they can always be recouped in case they were right. But since they're always false, it's to dare to go beyond fantasy, traversing the fantasy by de-eternalizing. And the de-eternalizing process is, of course, pure experience and the infinite now. Both are de-eternalization processes because subjectivity is gone. There's just an asubjectivity flowing. It has no center, has no identity. It's just there. It's just becoming. It's not a being, it's just becoming. Being essentially eternalism isn't, becoming is mobilism. So there's nothing there. So we could call that, by using our own philosophy, going back to dialectics, we can call that de-eternalization, to then re-eternalize. And re-eternalize means you go out of the pure experience, out of the infinite now, back to dialectical subjectivity, and suddenly your subjectivity returns. And it's fresh, it's been transformed, it's new, it's altered. And that was the point with the mystical experience. So you lost your subjectivity to then, as you get out of the mystical experience, immediately. This is why you don't have to be scared if you go into deep psychedelic experiences, because as soon as you come down with the psychedelic, the first thing that's going to happen is that your body is going to create itself again. So you can walk out to the refrigerator and get a glass of milk. You know, it's just the easiest thing in the world. Just physically connect with the body. Just put your hand on your body, will come out of a psychedelic trip, and you get your subjectivity back. You can do the same thing coming out of pure experience. So that we can return to eternalism mobilism by talking about de-eternalization, re-eternalization. We've never done that before. And the last thing I want to bring up here is concerning us here, being this small group, we are completely overrepresented in the shamanoid personality. That's parallax of spirit. 4% of the population LGBT. They have LGBT forums, the LGBT subcultures, they do whatever they want in the LGBT communities. We're shamanoid. So we're shamanoid in the sense we're beyond those categories. We're not regular Joes and Jills. We're the weirdos, we're the outcasts, whatever. But in this community, we're incast, as Raven says. In this community, we turn from outcast to incast, because in this community, we're incast. We're shamanic caste. And here's the interesting opposition. That means there's a dialectic between the sociant and the shamanic caste. The shamanic caste is the outcast. It's different from the sociant. So for a sociant that really knows what it's doing, the shamanic caste is its own self-realization. It's the most precious thing you've got within the membrane of the sociant, allowing it to also be outside the sociant when it has to then return back in. A functioning community, if you go utopian, a functioning community would allow its shamanic caste to walk in and out. With the shamanic caste being enlightened about being shamanic caste, it walk into the community and serve the community as a self-realization, and then it's totally integral to the community, and the loyalty to the community is total. And then the shaman said, we are definitely part of the community. We serve the outer realm, we serve the inner realm, we serve to keep them together, we serve to keep you guys together, we serve you to keep you safe from the outside world, and to expand the territory if we have to, and to reproduce productively, you know, expansively if we have to. So the community is served from the heart by the shamanic caste, by allowing the shamanic caste to be a self-realization within the membrane of the sociant. But to be shamanic, when the shamans say, now we got to go outside the sociant. We serve you better in the outside world. We serve you better in the wilderness. And you know it, because when you fuck up your life, you're going to run your way out of the community to try to find us, because the only place where you get distance enough to see your true archetype, to see what you've done wrong, and see what you should do instead, and de-eternalize to re-eternalize yourself. When you need to, you're going to go out of the wilderness to try to find us. And this explains precisely why monasteries are built in mountains and in remote areas. They're not built for people to hide. They're built because to build in the wilderness where you got the calm and the quiet, and the distance to the affairs of the sociant, so you can see the sociant clearly. The fantasies of the sociant won't affect you. And here's the thing. That's exactly the same journey out of the sociant into the wilderness as a civilization, as its own entity, doing the shamanic practices, being visited by members of the sociant to fix the men and to fix the women and to make the boys become men and to make the girls become women and send them back into the community and eventually foster the next leadership and foster the next king and foster the next queen so the community can hold together and work. All of that work is done in monasterial milieus outside the community. That's exactly the same thing as walking into the core of the temple. It's just that with the temple, you got an architecture, you go all the way in. And that's exactly why the core of the temple is protected by a membrane. And the next level protected by a membrane. And probably the third membrane, because nobody can run into the temple. Nobody's allowed to rush into the temple at all. Because what happens is there is so damn sacred that it's exactly the equivalent, architecturally, exactly the equivalent of putting an Isid monastery at the top of a mountain. That's why temples are built between communities. That's why temples are built as organized religion. That's why temples are built between socions so they can be shared by different socials. And that's why the shamanic has become neutral go-betweens between communities. Drink ayahuasca in the Peruvian jungle, you'll see the pattern right away. So I want to end that with just with us guys here realizing that we're shamanic cats. We need to understand who we are. We need to defend our position. We might have to actually fight for it and be expansive in our attitude. But I think it's important that we define what kind of social we're serving. We're also submitted to it. But we're submitted to it in the sense that we're also submitted to serving other socions if we have to. And by being go-betweens in between socions, that's exactly why for people standing outside the temple, when they fantasize about what's going on inside the temple, and if they fantasize about the Holy of the Holies at the very center of the temple, they fantasize about that that's where God is located, and that's why people are talking directly with God, because they're not terrified of God because they're shamanic. The priest talks to God on our behalf. See temple ruins, every culture you go to see the same pattern. So I want to finish there. I think we've done philosophy, religion, spirituality, the origins of them. We're trying to look at what we could do with them. And I love to get engaged in conversations with you guys. There we go.
Great.
Andrew, over to you.
Amazing. Yeah, found myself agreeing with 99% of what you said. A few little quibbles, but we can talk about that perhaps at another podcast. But
Oh, you can start
have
here.
some questions. You want me?
Yeah, and if it goes off, why don't you start out? And if it goes on for too long, we could just say that okay, we can afford to do a podcast about it because you and I can do that anytime. Why don't you start with a question?
Okay. Oh yeah. So
it's not that I want to convince you 100%. I want to convince you 98%. I want more doubts in between us because it's just fruitful. I just love to have
it's more fun. Yeah.
But you also realize how much you influence this thinking.
Well,
Do you own that, Andrew?
Yeah.
You guys know Sweeney versus Bart, how much of this is being repeated in this. So there you go.
Yeah. So we were talking about Baroque and minimalism, and when I was talking about Baroque, I was talking about Vajrayana because I think Vajrayana is very Baroque, but I think it's a sophisticated kind of inner Baroque. So in Vajrayana, the inner temple is Baroque. It's not minimalist. So that's the slight quibble I have. It's not the same kind of pop culture Baroque you find in Hollywood, but it has some similarities. Like it's not afraid to be a little bit primordial. So I think there's a Baroque and then a minimalist and then back to Baroque. And I also find one of the problems with Protestantism is it's so bloody minimalist. It just rips apart all the beautiful Baroque things. And so I find mysticism to be very Baroque in a lot of ways, at least the way I'm thinking of the word Baroque. So that would be my only.
Okay, I'll answer it right away. It's a really, really good question to start with. So the point is this, that you don't lose the minimalism when you're confronted with the Baroque and the crazy wisdom space. What you're doing is you're returning to the Baroque. You love the Baroque. You get engaged with the Baroque, but you're totally minimalist yourself.
Okay.
That's the crazy wisdom experience. That's why the crazy experience in Vajrayana does so successfully, in Sufism too. It does both the pure experience and it does the infinite now. And what I think is incredibly important for people is to not go towards the infinite now without having experienced the pure experience first. There's a point to having that order, because if you do pure experience first, you're prepared to understand the infinite now as the infinite now and not as plain psychosis. And that's exactly why the terror of the infinite now, if you go towards that experience without being grounded in the pure experience first, it's just my suggestion, without being grounded in pure experience first, is that you'll get addicted to it. Drug addiction, sex addiction, all those things are always addicted to a vulgar parody of the infinite now. And this is the wrong Baroque. So the point, I think you agree with me, my experience of Ariana is that you are so damn grounded in the pure experience that it's like it's just something lacking to your subjectivity you can start playing with now. And then the crazy wisdom teaching comes in and throws the Baroque at you. And this is the pure Baroque. This is the authentic Baroque. This is the Baroque that makes you go out in the world and serve the world afterwards and love people for being in the Baroque. I learned it the hard way in India. I learned it from Zoroastrians who refused to allow me to ever look down on Hindus. They just said, yeah, you belong to this fucking elite philosophy school. You're fortunate, whatever. Don't you ever, ever look down on a Hindu woman with 3 children who loves her children. And that taught me to love the Baroque properly. And of course, it inspired me to do shit like Army of Lovers, which is like totally Baroque.
Totally Baroque band,
yeah,
yes.
It's totally Baroque. And maybe little edge for crazy wisdom, pop music, I don't know. But subversive, certainly. But the point here is that I think you're right, but I think you're not seeing that the pure experience is still there, but it's so grounded that you can then, so for example, the one and the many, you can handle the many when you truly are in the one. You can handle mobilism when you truly understand eternalism. You can handle oscillation when you truly understand the power of negation. You can handle centralization. You can fight it like Max and I are doing when you truly have the spirit of decentralization. The point in the mystical journey is to go all the way, fully embracing and going into, and a full heart going into the entire mystical experience to get it, to be pathically one with it. And then you start saying, okay, this is the point. So decentralization, spirit decentralization, that means there's a point to a certain centralization. There's a point to law and order. If the social center is bigger than tribe, then we need police, we need the military, we need a border that we defend, that we're proud of. We should actually be more proud of our border than anything else. We put our flag there. So therefore the social center has a spirit. And it's my fucking job to construct a story to keep this shit together. That's when you do decentralization correctly, but you first have to visit decentralization. And that's why on the side of the sacred, on the side of the private, on the journey into the core, or the journey to the monastery, I'm on that journey to then learn properly to see what I'm going to use and handle when I get out of it. So to do really great art with Baroque, you got to go into minimalism.
Yeah.
Patrick Schumacher loves this. What Patrick Schumacher says about architecture in the 21st century, his dream, is that finally the sort of fascia between minimalism and Baroque is over, because we now realize what minimalism and Baroque are, and we could do architecture both ways. And we could explore minimalism there, Baroque there, and it's no longer this shift between the two extremes, which is kind of ridiculous, because now we define that they're actually correlated. Just like my work is about not opposing philosophy and religion, two sides of the same coin. Religion is just the practice. Philosophy is the belief. It's a theory. So they are intertwined. Monotheism, polytheism, two sides of the same coin. Polytheism doesn't come first and monotheism comes after. Bullshit, never happened. Polytheism returned to Catholicism to save fucking Christianity. The Trinity is polytheism. Without it, people couldn't relate to it. It was too abstract, too vague. So I think that is key to the understanding here. Okay?
Makes sense. Totally, yeah. Tim.
Who's next? Yep. Tim?
Tim has his hand up.
Hey,
Here comes crazy wisdom, Tim. All of you. Yeah, we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, entering the one, mysticism ends up being a saturation when you zero out all your senses, silent meditation and jhana practice or Mahamudra, whatever, any of that, you end up in a saturation experience. And generally, at least with the Christian mystics, like the contemplatives, you have a saturation of bliss and described as love. And then you know, Sufi mystics, you have the same thing. So an inner Baroque.
That's what I call the infinite now. So it's just a different, more modern term that I think sticks with people. The contradiction of the term is, of course, on purpose. So the infinite now is that search for that blissful state. Now, there are proper Sufis, there are serious Christian mystics. Simon Cowell has written, no, it's Simon Critch has written a good book called On Mysticism. He could have done more, but he basically isolated himself with the Christian mystics, with the Orthodox and Catholic mystics, because he was interested in those. But it's a good book that sort of summarizes their vision. There are those who do it seriously. I think it's a lot easier to go through Buddhism or the Zoroastrian Sufi traditions. I'm more really at Sufism is Zoroastrianism, and go through the Taoist traditions, because in those traditions, it's easier to define these. And there's also the dialectic between the pure experience and the infinite now, and one without the other doesn't make much sense.
There's also the apophatic, the no-thingness state, like the nothingness, and the cataphatic, which is the maximalist state that, you know, I think that's what you're talking about. That's the same terminology. Different
Exactly.
terminology
I should write that down. Apathetic and
cataphatic, yeah.
Cataphatic, yeah. And the cataphatic is tied to this work because I've worked a lot with the term cataclysmic. But I've discovered that just like I don't like the term presentism, I told you last week, I'm going to work with momentalism. It's not to invent new words. Just momentalism is a much, much better word. It says exactly what it is. Presentism doesn't. And the same thing with apathetic and cataphatic is that I've been working with cataclysmic, but I think seismology is better because seismology allows it to be whole field, like a field of study. It's a form of anthropology. Like a spiritual anthropology, do seismology. It's like, yeah, you do seismology. Okay, that makes sense. Earthquakes and shit, and hard to predict, and they really explosive when they happen, very costly. And we have social seismologies called revolutions, for example. They're also very not predicted in advance, and suddenly just things just explode. And then in hindsight, you understand, you get the logos, understand why they happen. It's perfectly according to the time axis. Seismology is a good term for me, so I work with that. So that's why I've avoided cataclysmic here. But yeah, apathetic and cataclysmic. And so there is those searches. What is important here, and comes from the Eastern traditions, that also relates to subjectivity. And that's why I think it's missing in existentialism, Western existentialism. The Dasein makes me go crazy because it seems to be some kind of a constant. There's nothing constant about subjective experiences at all. That's why I find it ridiculous to try to make science out of consciousness. There is no conscious state twice. Not even a state, because it's not a conscious state. It's a conscious state in the now, which dies the next moment. And another conscious state is born. You can't even think of conscious states as long. We like to make a line of them and say they belong together, so it's our consciousness. And then we attach the subjectivity to it. It's Tim's consciousness or whatever. But it isn't. Now we look closely. And that's why I don't get Dasein. To me, existentialism is so empty because it doesn't have the spectrum that phenomenology requires it to have. It doesn't have the intensities. It doesn't have the dialectical quarrels it goes through. It doesn't have the different states over the day. You can't understand something like ADHD, which is an information stressor. You can't understand about reading Heidegger, which I find so revealing. So it's a much more varied, more fluid, more living, much larger space we must require to try to understand subjectivity. If we should even try to understand subjectivity at all, maybe it's just better left to the arts. And any attempt at trying to do science of consciousness, to me, is ridiculous. Only autists dream about such things. Only these people who think everything is reduced to 0 to 1. Only people who think the universe is a fucking computer. It's ridiculous. No, you've been too long at your computer and start believing metaphors too much. It's not even a bad trip. It's just idiocy. So there you got me. You got me totally on the side of pathos in that sense.
I just want to say one more thing about existentialism, which, Chakta was talking about this. He says it leads to this sense like dread, existential dread. And there's no thingness state is something to be dancing on the rooftops about, not to feel dread. And If it's experienced within
Even
the
worse, it
context
leads to the
of,
superego injunction, because if you
yeah,
read fucking Heidegger, you realize you never read Freud, you realize he's just got trying to implement a fucking German Nazi Dasein inside of me. It's much more the superego than the ego experience ever is. So I just think, by the way, I want to thank Tim. Tim posted an excellent Mahamudra introduction by Lama Ola on the Intellectual Depot Day, which is a great way of being introduced to Mahamudra experience, which is one of these experiences we're talking about. So thank you for that, Tim. Do you have any more comments, Tim? Yeah.
Yeah, one more thing from Vajrayana. Last summer, it was really funny. The Karmapa is so cute. We had 10,000 people there for an empowerment, and basically, once he does his thing, you've got it. You don't have to go through the rest of it. Getting the blessing in we call it the Karmapa train. He walks around in a circle through the tent, giving everyone the blessing, and you get a little ball of special meat. I don't know, Andrew, if you know what that's called. You get
sometimes you get meat and alcohol, or marita, or
Yeah, you get a little. You put your hand out, and you get a little bit of alcohol
yeah,
that you slurp down, and you get a little blessing on the head. You get some candy, various things that you get,
yeah.
and a personal interaction with the Karmapa. All completely unnecessary. It's all aesthetics. Why do you do it? Because of
Fun.
objective experience.
Because it's or beautiful,
It's beautiful, and it
yeah.
brings you together. It's the community experience. You could go minimalist and just say, "Oh, I blessed
No,
you
no,
there."
no, 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 no. That is the priestly duty. That's what priests do when they're
Yeah.
excellent. That's a great priest. You just described a great priest with his community. So, for example, last winter I was in Peru, shoving the Huantar, which, if you know about it, Stanford are doing the excavations there. It's this stunningly beautiful Alpine Valley, or Andean Valley, in the Andes, and it's kind of chilly, at night, and rains all the time, green. And there's the biggest of all the temples, of the Shaman temples, is there. It's huge, by the way. It's 3,000 years old and huge, right? And you have all these. You have the large field with the entire community, especially the youth, sort of the sexualized space. They were showing off, probably doing sexual rituals, whatever. You have the huge space, which is central to the whole thing. And then you walk your way up towards hills, and then you walk up the stairs, a lot of stairs. It's the Andes, and you walk up, and then you get a women's smaller space, which is clearly feminine energy to it. It's designed that way. You get another space, which is like a masculine energy. It's with the men and the fathers are located, and the sons get, their do their, practices, whatever, to do the rite of passage and all those things. You clearly have those things. And then you walk up, and the next thing is the priestly space, which is, of course, much, much smaller. You could tell, like, priests, monks, nuns, possibly, gathered there for their rituals. Then, after that, you go into the temple, into all the way up to the lansat, which is like this huge phallic structure inside of it, which is stunningly beautiful, huge, by the way. The huge phallus, of course. And it's inside a womb, inside a temple, the phallus in the matrix. And to get in there, you have to be the high priest. Today, we got access. Out of respect for the community, we had access. So I could do my own ceremony there, but out of respect for this community, for the Shamanic community, this is clearly how religion works. And it's the pattern I see. Anywhere they could afford to build something like that, because the Andes were wealthy. They farmed everything. They had potatoes and corns just around the corner everywhere. All those things come from those valleys. So absolutely, they were wealthy and they did well, and also protected from the outside world. So they created enormous wealth. And it was like a culture where the monasterial aspect, I'm talking about shamanic aspect, was so dominant. This was also the place where people would travel from all over the Andes, both from the north, and they would travel from the coast, and they would travel from the deserts, and they would travel from the jungles. Why? Because archaeologists now discovered, no, Peru wasn't three separate cultures. It wasn't the coast and the mountains and the jungles as they expected before. No, they traded with each other all the time. So you could even find traces of ayahuasca in the mescaline community, so we can get rid of that nonsense. Peru was a trading country, basically. So you see all this, and you see the whole pattern, how it leads up, and it gets smaller the closer you go into the core of the temple. And this is why the core temple, by not being accessible to people, it's exactly why it works. I realized that these barred absolutes you were not allowed to pass through is exactly what immunized the community from any form of nihilism. It just produced value and meaning, boom, because of the very architecture of it. So none of these things are for everybody. Now, I would also propose that if you do go into mysticism, if it is your calling, if you're being let in, if somebody who's old and wise lets you through the membrane in, you're probably going to go into one mystical tradition, one specific purpose, geared towards a certain group of archetypes or something like that. For example, men and women do very, very different things when they go mystics, because they have very, very different roles to serve in the community. And at the end of the day, we're all submitted to the sociant. We're serving the sociant. We might serve several sociants, or we might serve them together to keep them together, but we still serve the sociant no matter what we do. All right. Georgie.
Yes.
Question?
So what I also hear is the architectural setup of the sacred and profane. The innermost core of the temple is basically where the definition of the word comes by transitioning into the profane. Is that correct? What I'm thinking about?
The profane is when you're standing in a valley and you got stairs to climb up to a monastery. You're profane. And then you walk up the monastery, and as the closer you get to the monastery, the more you get a sense of being close to something sacred. And when you're being let in through the doors of the monastery to do your practice in the monastery, you're now part of the sacred.
Yeah, I'm coming from the other direction. You transition from the sacred outside. And that movement, that definition.
Then you're trained and you're walking outside to serve.
Exactly, yeah.
You're leaving the Tantra to serve the Sutra. So you're finished training, you've had your experiences, you understand the world in a way nobody else does. You might even be able to transcend the fantasies of people out there. But when you walk out and you get to know the people outside to serve them, you hold back. You hold back from the pathos and the logos to serve them the mythos they need. It's not the noble lie played at all. Not at all. The noble lie is exactly the misunderstanding what this is. No, this is to tell them what they can handle now. That means they might get all the knowledge in the world you can pass them eventually, if they're ready for it and when the time's right for it. But right now, they get served what they can handle. So if it's a 4-year-old in front of you, you don't throw hardcore pornography at them. That's exactly what the barred absolutes are so natural, because when we go into the vertical archetypes, which is your age, child, teenager, adult, elder, dying, whatever. The vertical archetypes are along the life path. So man or woman, but along the life path. That's vertical. The horizontal archetype is what kind of man or what kind of woman are you? And how does your womanhood serve the other women and therefore the tribe? How does your manhood serve the other men and therefore the tribe? And that's the horizontal archetypes. So, and they're the ones you discover as a child. You look promising. People pointed out that you got certain talents. And then in your teenage years, you get self-confidence because you're being embraced by elders who have this talent. And you're being adopted by mentors who take you in to develop your archetype. So that's how that works. So when you come out of the tantric, the point of being there was to humbly come out and serve the community. Anybody tries to go into the tantric realm for their own sake is a hedonist. It will fall flat. And is seeking of the kicks. I mean, once you go in, you've done it to such a, whenever you go into crazy wisdom mode and you try to just be there for people, but you also know you're not going to overdo anything because they might need a hard time. They might need a tough experience. You don't want to give them a fucking pillow in that case. No, you want them to go straight through it and hit the rock. They can start dealing with things they've asked to deal with to begin with. When you go into that mode, the crazy wisdom mode, then you discover that if they're not in there to learn something to then go out and serve the community, they're there for all the wrong reasons. And the way you point them out in a contemporary setting is you just look at them and say, oh, so you're here for the kicks? We don't serve kicks here. For example, you don't give them the chacruna ayahuasca, you give them the ayahuasca without chacruna. No tripping, no visions, nothing to brag to your friends about. Just a really tough, deep, nasty experience and 8 dreadful hours, probably just what you needed. And that's what the shaman gives you. And you hate the shaman for it, but then the shaman just said, you're not supposed to love me. You're supposed to learn to live. That's what crazy wisdom is. You just went up against the wall. Psychoanalyst, it's always this ice cold wall where you realize you're only talking to yourself. But you're talking to yourself against the wall that is professional in reflecting what you just said. The only thing is that the reflection from the psychoanalyst is a professional one. So you can't really fool yourself or anybody else any longer. You have to be confronted actually where you're located. And you realize that the only journey you're doing is a journey towards yourself. And this is crazy wisdom. And of course, we talked about this before. Sweeney, Bart, Hammerich have done this before. Is that we also discovered in our previous conversations a couple of years ago that crazy wisdom is also the impossibility to mimic. That's what the crazy wisdom teachers are. Drink alcohol, take tons of drugs, fuck your wife, and then tell you they just did. You're going to hate them or whatever, but you can't copy them. Because you're supposed to find yourself. You're supposed to stop being a copy. That's also crazy wisdom. So that genuine journey towards your true archetype, to personify that archetype paradigmatically in the here and now, and God to serve the community. That's the whole point with the mystical experience. It's not a utilitarian experience. We have to stress that. It's not about utility of you. It's not something you send people off to like in education. It is a calling. It is a calling. But once you're there doing it, it's your archetype that it's just like, yeah, this is the thing I'm supposed to do. I'll do it. I'll go through it. And then you realize you get both the horrors and you get the ecstasies and you get all those different experiences. And you have everyday reality, which is a cup of coffee in the morning and go to work to fulfill your archetype. But that's the only desire you have when you go mystical.
Yeah, it morphs into a way where you experiment on the subject to gain more wisdom to understand how to serve people.
Yeah. And you're not getting to know a general subjectivity. This was the mistake of existentialism. There's no such thing. You get to know the archetype. That's how people naturally try to find a role model to look up to called a saint or an icon. They can go to it. It's like they're talking to an older, successful version of themselves. And therefore, they can figure out a lot of things. They don't necessarily have to go and see a mentor. And when they don't have access to a mentor, give them a fucking icon to worship. And the way you present the icons, you tell them, the icon will talk to God on your behalf, so you can talk to the icon. Meaning you will talk to yourself, but you will sort things out. You come out of the experience stronger, owning your archetype, walk out of it. Because the icon saw you, you were seen by the icon, you got the phallic gaze from the icon, meaning you were in your archetype, and you get self-confidence, and you walk out of there, and as priests and monks, we just laugh and said, yep. Now he figured out who he was. He worshipped his fucking icon. That's the brilliance of polytheism.
The other question connected is, you talk about pure experience and what was the other one? Infinite now. You talk about that as like a pendulum, as you have almost like, it sounds like an either or, but why is there no end? Is that something that's...
No. The two sides of the spectrum, they're absolutely impossible to experience at the same time. You can't be psychosis and neurosis at the same time. Just forget about it. No. But what struck me when I started working on this last year was that I talked to Victor and Joachim about it here at the monastery. He said, but they're both selfless. Yeah. One of them self is dissolved, and the other case self was never there. So the experience of pure experience in Zen Buddhism, which is the Zen critique of Hegel, is that Hegel is amazing and finally the West got the philosopher they needed, but he's lacking in understanding of pure experience. And the thing with Hegel is that he's just basically leaving subjectivity in the dialectical loop. So my dialectical subject we're talking about is the Hegelian subject. But Hegel never claimed that this was the only subjective experience. his subject walks around. He just didn't write about it that much. He wasn't too interested in it. He was interested in dialectics and teaching people how to think. That was Hegel's big problem. Science of logic is all about that. So, but when we start looking at what people did afterwards to Hegel, then of course you get Freud and the unconscious, subjectivity. You get Nietzsche, who's the ultimate individualist, who takes Kantian subjectivity to its very extreme. Look at how amazing and fantastic I am, like Sloterdijk writes about Nietzsche. Finally, somebody who didn't, who didn't excuse himself. Finally, somebody said, the biggest, greatest guy ever, bah, And that's what's so refreshing with Nietzsche, because it was a total break with the sort of bourgeois, humble, fake humility you had before Nietzsche came along. So he goes all the way into complete, full affirmative subjectivity. Of course, he ends up alone in that experience because it was an experiment, but it's a fascinating experiment. And then you get Darwin in evolution, which is basically, subjectivity is just a byproduct of an evolutionary process, so it probably serves a bigger cause than the subject thinks. Reproduction, right? So all those thinkers come after Hegel. Hegel's opened the door, but Hegel didn't say, he just put the Hegelian subject there on the map aside. When this subject can think itself as a poetically infinite loop that never reaches itself, as an Ouroboros, it's realized that's what subjectivity is. And fundamentally, that's what subjectivity is. But what the Japanese said, Nishida and Tanaka, was that, but pure experience is different because the poetic infinity dissolves. Then I started thinking, okay, maybe then the infinite now, with the Sufis and the Vajrayana, maybe that isn't, as I thought from Freud, that's an escape back into the womb at all. And then I realized, no, it can't be, because it's a post-subjective experience. So it's not escapism. The infinite now, when being sold to a drug addict, is definitely the urge to go back into the womb. As any heroin abuser knows, heroin is a very underwhelming experience, but you're definitely back inside your mother's womb and you don't have to care about anything. So you're escaping your brain's problem-solving capacity. You've stopped enjoying solving problems. You lack self-confidence deeply. You're in a depressive mode where you can't even exercise. You can't read a book. You can't anything. All you're longing for is that next heroin shot to escape into a blissful state. That's escapism. That's wrong. But the infinite now, where I go and search for the dissolution of myself into something way bigger than myself, into an ecstatic, blissful experience, when I'm dissolved, that's deeply spiritual to me. And this is what came out of Zoroastrianism, was inherited by Sufism. And this is why Zoroastrianism, Buddhism increasingly looked like the original Sufism was really the merger of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, possibly also with Tengrism thrown in. We shouldn't underrate Tengrism. There's a huge Tengrist revival going on in Turkey right now. And among Turks, even some Russians, Caucasians, Mongols, Kyrgyzstans, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, they're all going into this Tengrism revival, which is even stronger than Zoroastrian revival is among Persians and Kurds. But it's happening in parallel. It's a sister religion of Zoroastrianism. I find Tengrism incredibly interesting. And Tengrism is where we got the word shaman from. Tengrism, like Zoroastrianism, is totally pro-psychedelics, which to me is a good sign. So I think we should stay in the realm of these different religious and spiritual traditions, see what we can get out of them, and try to then combine them into something credible today, which makes sense. And that's why we picked the name Zufism.
Thank you.
Part of it, Georgie. So the extremes, you can't experience both at the same time. That's why I say with Lacan that the dialectical subjective experience where your sense of self is strongest is precisely midway between these two extremes. And that's why that experience is perverted, because it is subject distanced from its interactions with the world. So you can look at yourself separately from yourself as an interacting being. So your actions and your thinking can be separated. And often, as in Zoroastrianism, that means you get a commitment in between, because you better use thinking as the virtue and then committing yourself to the act, which is almost like you do it in the past. So what you're doing actually in the potential now in between is that you're committed. The potential is the commitment, because once you're committed, you will do exactly what you're committed. The life is in the commitment, in the potential. That's where the present is located in Zoroastrian ideology. All right. Luber? Because Luber got something coming up?
Yeah. So, okay, so the part where you're like, okay, you got to have the border and stamp your flag, and then you kind of, shout out your story to justify it all. So the story, I just want to get a grip before I ask the question. So the story, in a certain sense, is the logos that is keeping everything together, yeah?
No, the mythos. This is
So
the
the
mythos.
story is a mythos.
The mythos
Okay.
is the story of the sociant as sociant. It's a story of the sociant's history until now. It's a story of the sociant's origin. And it also gives the sociant a goal, a direction. Because you have to remember that all storytelling is and must be fundamentally nomadic. Because there were nomads until very, very recently. Permanent settlement is incredibly overrated hype. The closer we look at history, permanent settlement only arrived 500 years ago. It was never the condition of human beings. Human beings were nomadic and then semi-nomadic and then back to nomadic. Constantly, constantly, constantly. The entire humanism. So we're totally shaped by the mind. So you have to realize that the sociant is in movement. That's why the philosophy of flux is original philosophy. Anything with eternal forms is completely decadent and comes much later. So it's movement. And because it's movement, it's the priest and the chief leading. The phallus is leading. The matriarch in the matrix is the last safe container. If you walk behind the old bitch, you're dead. All women also have to walk in front of the matriarch for the tribe to move. That means the sociant story is the story about how we get up tomorrow morning, all of us pick our things together and start moving again to survive. That's the myth. That's the ultimate myth. This is the myth that Jordan Peterson and the guys missing. This is the myth of the sociant itself. Exodus stories, all those stories are different variations of them, but nomadology is the fundamental religion, and all religion comes from nomadology. There is no other religion. All other religions are varieties of reformations of nomadology, but nomadology is what religion is.
Got it. Okay, so I guess I'm trying to understand logos in relation to all this, and part of me has this urge to situate logos in the moment a story becomes a cohesive pattern.
Logos is totally on the masculine side. When you send out spies to check out where the sociant can walk without being killed, when you check out spies to check where there's food and where there isn't food, when you check out spies into the future, when you check out spies into the sort of tribal unconscious, we check them out, we send out spies to go there, they're also being followed by hunters and warriors, and you don't want your hunters and warriors to die. Now, if you've ever been hunting, you know that knowing exactly how long it is between you, the gun, and the moose, and you and the next hunter and the moose, and you know exactly, minusculely, zeros and ones everywhere. You can't do warfare. You can't do hunting without knowing exact zeros and ones. And the better you know the zeros and ones, the more likely you'll hunt down the animal or you win the war. So logos is on the side of the masculine, and it's the calculated performance of the masculine brain that fundamentally does the logos. The problem is that this is also matched by the pathos, which is also on the masculine side. So it's the masculine brain which is divided between the logos and the pathos. So to survive in wilderness, the masculine brain has to have a strong emotional sense of where dangers are and be able to be intuitive. So the logos is matched by the pathos. That is the masculine brain. It's forever a dialectical deadlock. It cannot find any resolution to its dialectical deadlock. The only way to find a resolution is to fuck a pussy. Because why? The pussy is the mythos. So we associate the mythos, motherland, hello. We associate the mythos with the sociant, story about the sociant, where I, as a hunter and a warrior, return after I won the war or successfully hunted. And I better not return into the inner realm at all. I better not return to the matriarch to fuck the women there and to have feasts with him. I better not return unless I've been successful. This is fundamentally how nomadology operates. So mythos is on the side of women. Women, therefore, have wholeness. We associate wholeness and holism with women. We associate the unity of the social with the feminine. We associate every unity. The only problem for women, because they're not trained to be hunters and warriors, maybe they're not even born to be hunters and warriors, unless they're lesbians, they're not. But since the vast majority of women are not, that means women might find it hard to separate between fact and fiction. And I think in a society as sophisticated as ours, we have to remember that to separate fact and fiction is absolutely essential. We build society on it. That's how patriarchy still has to be there. Because if we can't separate fact and fiction, we go straight into anarchy.
Got it. Okay, so let me just have a follow-up question here. So where do you see story structure in the fold here? Because like with Aristotle's Poetics, for example, like, you know, you have a clear, there's a clear, almost in a scientific way, exposition, inciting incident, climax, resolution. And you have that in the story. And you could say, oh yeah, the drive is the end, the death, like as you would put it on IDW. But that's a tangent. I guess, just to reiterate, the question is, where do you see story structure in relation to myth as story? Essentially.
Great, perfect. Use what I just told you. So go into the negations. It's not logical narrative, because that's science and maths.
Right.
Science is horrible in a theater. If I give you a speech on your 50th birthday and just recall what you went through your life, you'd hate me for it. Logos is terrible at telling stories. It is its own story. It's a narrative, but it's science and maths. And right now, being bombarded by stupid computer scientists who believe the universe is a fucking computer because they were computer scientists and they have tons of money and there are crappy books about the universe as a computer. They're just so fucking autistic. They don't realize that we hate their books because they're boring. They're dead. Logos deals with the past. Zeros and ones are always of the past. Consciousness, yes, is of logos, but the logos of the past is zeros and ones. It's dead. Okay, so that's not mythos. That's not mythos, all right? The practical narrative is violence, sex, power directly. Fucking. Killing somebody. A snuff movie. Practical narrative. News feeds aspire to it. Sometimes they dare, sometimes they don't. But news feeds aspire to our sensationalism in that the news feed, the everyday news feed, has got a feed of sensational pictures about cruel things going on in the world because we really get engaged with the pathological narrative. This explains also why you cannot have pornography in a movie or make a movie with pornography because people just hate it. Pornography is definitely on the side of the pathological narrative because it's so fucking direct. You're not faking the erect penis. You're not faking the wet vagina. That's pornography is. So pornography is violence, sex, violence, power, real power games. The real power, the real nasty power games. The real power out there is pathical. So the pathical narrative, that's not mythos. The mythos is in between the two. The point of the mythos is to teach us how to live. That's why you go to Shakespeare play. And what's great with the Shakespeare play is that it's so strong on the logos because the text is so fucking well written. It's so strong on the pathos because the guy who wrote the play could really go mystical and go into the minds of the people he wrote about. And the fact that it both has the strong pathos of the passion in the play and this elegance with words and relationships and timing. He's got the logos and the pathos right to do brilliant mythos. So the answer to your question, mythos is always the dance between the logos and pathos when you maximize them both.
That makes sense to me. I get, just to push back a little bit, even in a porno, there's still this like story structure progression. There's a climax. There's the money shot.
No. I've read it. We studied this. People hate those parts of the pornography. That's just an excuse to go to the porn. They hate it. Just like when they get a pornographic scene, too much of the dick and the pussy and you know, some challenging French actors or whatever in an art movie, people get completely just like, no, can I just pass through this? I want to go back to the story. No. That's pornography attempting to be film. Or that's film attempting to be pornographic. They both fail. What's so interesting is how much they fail. They fail miserably because they're actually involved in two different narratives. That's why I used the example of the computer scientist thinking he's a fucking storyteller and a philosopher. I'm just like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Okay, you're just a zeros and ones guy with a ponytail that doesn't even fuck. Why
you would say,
I always tell people, don't ever believe a philosopher doesn't have a great sex life. The first thing a philosopher does is get a great sex life. Because otherwise he's totally compromised by his lousy sex life and we call her everything he claims to think.
okay. So even in a porno, you're saying there's no like there is no structure. I guess what I'm getting at is,
Are you being
way...
autistic with me right now, Luber?
No.
Have you watched
I'm
a
not being
porno and
autistic. I'm
sensed
saying
the porno?
there's
Have you
an end.
sensed pornography? Have you understood the point with pornography? It's not what's literally there. There's too much logos. It is what it's about. It's somebody fucking on your behalf. That's pornography. That's why you're watching it. Right?
No, I get the mental projection part and how it makes you, how you feel the pornography. But I'm saying when the pornography becomes expressible, doesn't it have this like structure, even if it's not as intentional or just so top down heavy as, let's say, the autistic computer science is claiming about the
take
universe?
a better example. You get stuck pornography, snuff movie. So you got
Sure.
Islamic State. British guy, happy to be British, have a British passport, picked up in Syria, taken out of the desert. One of those guys picks up a phone and starts filming the gradual, slow, torturous execution, cutting of the guy's neck. Is there a story to it? Yeah, I guess. What's the point with the story? To drag it on for as long as possible, to make it as horrible as possible. So you're going to hate those guys as much as possible so they can use that energy against you to tell you they hate you just as much. Yeah, there's a story, but it's not anything remotely similar to mythos. It's a pathical narrative. It's its own.
I agree with that. Yeah. I completely agree with that. There's this cross domain structure that it might. The structure, how it's there, might be different in the pathic sense. It just might express itself different, or how you fill in the content is just totally different. But there seems to be, like, if everything is toward death, then there has to be this.
Let's keep them separate. The point is to keep them separate. A staged snuff movie that isn't a snuff movie, it's happening in real time, is theater, it's mythos. The snuff movie, if it currently happens, right here and now, you're watching it on fucking YouTube while it's happening. That's pathos. So the pathical narrative is distinctly stuck in the present, and there it gets its power. That's why people love to watch live sports. So they literally sympathize with the 7,000 people at the soccer game when your team scores. They don't want to watch it in hindsight. Only anthropologists watch soccer games in hindsight. So that's pathical narrative. The pathical narrative is so located in the now. That's exactly the surprises and the contingencies and the shocks and the sensations of the now, or the plain boredom of it, if you want to. Cricket games are like that, is the point. The mythos is designed. It is theatrical. And we can handle more because of it, because we know there's a distance to it, because it's replaying an assumed past that maybe never happened. But it creates alternative realities. And that's why we love it. And that's why mythos is the way to tell a story for people to mean something. I can only feel aligned with my sports team if I watch a fucking sports game. It's not going to teach me what it's like to be man or human or whatever. So if I go to the theater, I get a whole different perspective. Or I can put the soccer game in the theater and portray it as if it happened in real time to study it, but I'm still, of course, staging it, designing the whole experience. And this is what mythos is.
I understand. I have more to say. I don't want to hold up everybody if there's more questions.
No, I think your questions are fantastic. I think you're going to work on themos, but if you're going to do themos, I would highly recommend you to study the three themoses separately. That's why I'm moving it towards a pluralism of themos in our work. And
I agree with that.
And then specialize in one of them. Don't try to go all over the place, because then you're doing narratology. You have to be a philosopher. Then you do what I'm doing. Now, if you're going to go into themos, pick one of them. Why don't you put themos on the mythos as we've suggested, and study what mythos is thoroughly and understand how it's not pathos and not logos. And defend it. Theater needs defense. Theater needs to be defended. We need theater soldiers like you, people who love theater, who love film, who love art, who love these things, and not so much tell people how to do it, but rather defend their capacity to do it and strengthen their self-confidence to do it. If you could be the artist's best friend, then you're a great philosopher. And I think themos is a great title for that. Go with it. But themes, to me, are essentially mythical. If themes applied on logos, there's just different sciences. Those banal. And if themes are applied to pathos, it's just different energies. Well, there's sex, there's violence, there's power games. Okay, those are the packages you go with the themes. But if you go with themes and mythos, you have an infinite amount of themes you could explore.
I totally agree. I'm just, part of me is like obsessed with the moment in which the mythos makes in contact with what's expressible, that like being particular content, which can vary across different domains, as you pointed out, and might be too much of a task for any one thinker to really, fixate on. But there is something where there's this antagonizing.
Always learn this one thing from Alex Siebert. Constraint is gold. Without constraint, you're never going to be creative. I learned it in music. I do it in philosophy. I set very, very clear limits, and I'll stay within those limits. Otherwise, you're never going to be creative. If you overreach, go megalomaniac, do too many things, themos is not going to be interesting. Your topic is going to be interesting by locating it somewhere and specializing on something and digging into it and falling in love with it, and therefore encouraging people to do, for example, brilliant mythos that we really need. So why don't you go there? And in case with this lecture today, on this discussion, I would highly recommend you to add the mystical aspect to it, which is that what if you go deep, 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 deep into mythos, into a world that people out there don't understand, but that the very few people who have real artistic intelligence and real artistic talent go with you, and then go in there and really, really see what mythos and themos is in its negation, in its minimalism, and then go out and do something brilliant with it. That's the path you should take.
Totally. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Yeah.
Well done, Luber, and good luck with working on the themos and writing a book eventually. You should.
Thank
Andrew.
you. Yep.
I just think that art needs mysticism. Otherwise, it becomes a game. This is what my observation of great art is. There's always a dipping into mysticism on some level. Otherwise, it's bread and circuses. Oh, I can't hear you, Alexander. You're muted.
I thought I muted it. Okay, then. I'll just repeat what Owen and I told Patrick Schumacher today as our shared fantastic one-liner. All art is religious and all religion is art. So we're talking about exactly the same thing. Yes, art is one expression of the mystical experience, and that's exactly, it's like if spirituality is located in between, then religion becomes the logos and art becomes the pathos of a mythos, which is spirituality.
The other thing I was thinking about what Luber said is that mythos is by definition constraint in a way. It constrains pathos and logos, or it
all of them are constrained, Andrew, because they're narratological, dialectical triad. So mythos is irreducible to logos and pathos, which is then the constraint for logos and pathos. Like I talked to Luber here, fantastic conversation, by the way. The logos is irreducible to mythos and pathos. Doesn't mean it's infinite. It means it's constrained by mythos and pathos. The pathos is irreducible to the logos and the mythos. In return, pathos is to understand that pathos is constrained. They're constrained precisely because narratology forces them to stay in their different loops. They might merge and they might go into one another, but eventually they don't make sense unless we put them back into their folds. In the world of philosophy, it means ontology is ontology, epistemology is epistemology, and of course, phenomenology is phenomenology. And that's what last week we explored how phenomenology is actually ahead of the other two because it's direct experience. And therefore, in the now, you get epistemological. That's where you have a possibility to interact with the world with the freedom, because your absolute freedom you had when you're phenomenological collapses into the non-freedom of the ontology. And once ontology has arrived, the past arrived, everything is fixed. You better love it. With Nietzsche, Amor Fati, done. Nothing can be changed or altered. So this is why the logos, the past, and the mythos can also be picked into these three different places along the time axis, but they're still irreducible to one another, but also constrained by one another.
Okay.
So the mythos is constrained by It can't work with absolute freedom, and it's dead with absolute certainty. Mythos is exactly what operates in between the freedom and the certainty. It's exactly in the doubt, exactly in the intuition. That's exactly when we go mythical. That's we associate women and the feminine with that space. We associate feminine and women with being present, because that's where it's located. So the logos and the pathos can be separated, the logos into the past and the pathos in the future.
Max, did you have a question?
Yeah. Forgive me for being a little
Max Board is in the house. Okay, here we go, Max.
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it exactly, but there's a sense in which the sociant is if not sacred, verging on sacred in an sense, in a deep sense of where we're supposed to be. And in contemporary life, there's a suggestion of making synthetic or approximating the sociant, I would assume, to get sort of, because contemporary life takes us out of that construction that is most natural to us, that is most familiar in the sense of familial. And the same can be said for these I think for these inner sancta, the Addington, for example, that you talk about, which is these are sacred spaces, the innermost spaces that are restricted for the holiest of the holy, the hierophants, or the priest. These in the modern world, in some sense, require approximating or synthetic versions of these that are temporary constructions. Does that what does it require to do that, or is that even possible? In other words, we can imagine an emergent or sort of organic or natural bottom-up process of the sociant forming, for example, in our nomadic past. But these days, we need to approximate it in some way because that's not available to us as a social construction, at least not really. And something similar can be said about someone building a temple or a sacred space at Burning Man. It's ephemeral. It's not, it's a construction. Are these sort of manufactured or synthetic sociants spaces, sacralizations, are they possible, and how does one go about them if so?
Okay, I got good news for Max, because the problem with civilization can be summarized in this one sentence. Whenever somebody tries to fuck with the archetypes, everything goes to hell. And the result is misery and poverty and, stupidity, right? So that's why I hate fucking pillar saints and activists who want to change you. I never want to change a human being. My 19-year-old mother says the best quality I ever had. The best quality I ever had outside of never try to change another human being. You figure it out that human beings can change themselves if they want to, and you highly respect that. So the great thing with the sociant is because it's shaped over millions of years, it's so strong that it always returns. So, for example, you get the court decision in the UK today that a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and that was apparently a breakthrough. And a woman sat on TV and said, we don't have anything against trans people. And I was just thinking, why don't you just invent 4 categories? The problem is solved. It's just a lack of imagination. Because trans people, trans men and trans women are probably on the, go-betweens between men and women highly needed in the social. So the social's glue is to basically say, okay, we got 2 separate cultural sexes now. The tiny minorities, they're not going to offend anybody. They can have the unisex bath or whatever they want. And they have men and men and women are happy being men and women. Why is man and woman returning? Because we try to play with man and woman, and people got so upset with it because it's against archetypology. So people return to it. So people will naturally start creating communities of a few hundred people up to, say, 1,200, and that works. Facebook thrived as long as the Facebook community was 1,200. When the Facebook community started going into 12,000 people, people lost interest in them because they couldn't relate to them. They could have asked me, could have said stop at a certain number and only allow people if you throw but out. It's a bit like the nightclub can house 1,200 people. It's a large nightclub. But if you let in 12,000 people, it will burn down. Everybody will leave, bored. So the Saussant will return. So when you say synthetic, you can paradigmatically try to create Saussant. But if you do art, and if you do participatory art, like Owen and Raven, our great friends, are doing now. We had a discussion with Patrick today about dark renaissance and the metaverse, whatever. But they're working with trying to create this experience with people together. And they work with these forms. And as soon as they get close to the form of the Saussant, or the smaller ones, clan or family, as soon as you get close to clan 157, family of 40 people, as soon as you get close to those sizes, people suddenly get really calm, listen better to each other, take each other in, inspire each other. It's like if you put 40 people together, you get a fantastic dinner party. Because that's how you celebrate a family. And so this is so ingrained in culture. This is biological, genetic, and fighting is stupid. So the Saussant will return. The problem today, that's not enough, because we're 8 billion and not just local Saussants. So we got to figure out a new way for the Saussants to communicate with each other without throwing bombs at each other and killing each other, or else we're done. And that is, of course, the question I'm addressing in this megalomaniac work, which is, what was it that mystics reached so they could communicate deeply with strangers without even sharing the same language? That's what I'm trying to get at right now. That is the $1 trillion question I want to get at right now. Because the Saussant will return, certainly. And you and I, Max, we're doing theory. The best thing you and I can do is to work with people who then do the practice. So if you figure out that Saussantic shapes work and we can get the data to do it, you can try any of these theories with data anthropology today. You can just throw data at things and discover, yeah, these patterns occur and they somehow seem to be stable with people. They have a platformic kind of quality to them. Okay, right, with every people around the world. Funny enough, introvert, extrovert doesn't matter. We always remember about 1,200 people. Then we stop forgetting about who people are. So these forms will return. So I think you're very, very, very safe to work from the archetypes. But the specific expression of the archetype is paradigmatic, and that requires artistic talent. And that's why when we're doing great theory, we can work with people who would then inspire to do artistic expressions of the theories. Otherwise, trying to do the whole thing again, like I warned Luber, is a bit megalomaniac. And we exhaust ourselves. I think you and I are brilliant theorists, and that's what we do well, and that's our constraint, and we love it. So why not there? Yeah. I think Luber had a following question. I just want to address that. If you have more to say, Max will do. But it was something about mythos. He goes back to the mythos and want mythos to be more than it is. He can't accept the constraint. So Luber said something about mythos being the constraint of the constraints. No, that's narratology, stupid. Narratology dictates. Here's mythos, here's pathos, here's the logos. And I'm a philosopher, so is Max. It's an art form. Philosophy rules everything else. Science is submitted to philosophy. Almost everything is submitted to philosophy, with one exception, art, because philosophy is a subordinate to art. It's an art form. So philosophy licks the ass of art, while everybody else is to lick the ass of the philosopher. It's good because there is no guy at the top if you start looking at it carefully. The point with narratology is mythos, logos, and pathos are equals. None of them is on top. The way America should be run, the president shouldn't run the affairs. You know, the Supreme Court and the Congress should stand up to him, but it's a bit problematic in America at the moment, a bit mad. We'll see where that ends. Probably in a very much weaker presidency in 5 years' time. That'd be very likely. We'll see where that goes. So, yeah, Max, did you have a follow-up on that, or did it make sense? Good, good. Yeah, we're sort of rounding off, aren't we, Andrew?
It seems that way. We've come to 10 o'clock.
I think Lisa maybe had something. Okay, these guys, they talking to each
Lisa
other.
has some cool things to say, or some intriguing comments.
Finally, the digital fires took off with the what do we call them? The digital.
Oh yeah, I have to say that digital campfire, that it's going to be
Saturday.
This Friday. So the digital campfire is this Friday.
Okay, so apparently you guys
and you're all invited.
Really enjoy talking to each other without me being present, which you should. So the cat's out the door and the rats have a party. Go on, have the rat party. Yeah, I think you guys have ideas here that are probably correct. You discuss with each other, and yeah. Was that Lisa? I wanted Lisa to ask questions. She has great questions. Wasn't Lisa in there somewhere? Yeah.
You know, I'll just say real quick, I know we're ending, but this has just been, you know, I exist in the mythonomic So I had to listen to last week's session 3 times to kind of take it in. I'm in the IDW, but I'll never have a real-time response. But I'm an artist by background, and I think what you're building here for this book has so much explanatory power, Alexander, for my work, for my life. So just, yeah, what you just said about, the theory building, providing, yeah, so much that I need, the food that I need to, test the prototype that I'm building. So I know we're
Thank you so much, Lisa. And finally, I got your face, your voice here back again. You're amazing. And I will give you now a project, which is to adopt our dear Luber and teach him the constraints of mythos so he can really appreciate mythos. It's only through constraints you can really appreciate something. Once he learned to not be all over the place all the time, but stay with the mythos and stay inside of it, enjoy its constraints, and really, he could probably be a great supporter of artists and theater people and filmmakers and whatever. He's got his heart in it, and he's a very, very clever guy. So I'm so glad to have had him here. So you adopt him, Lisa, because you get it. You can explain to him how your art flows. What makes it flow? That's what he's looking for when he's looking for this idea with themos. So yeah, family.
Okay. So everybody here is shamanoid. So that's pretty cool. So thank you to everybody for being here. It's been incredible as usual.
Big love to you all. It's been wonderful. And I've got a notebook full of notes, and I got some of your names attached to it. And I'll probably return to you guys as well when it's time to write. So loved the experiment. It's been just as intimate, just intense as I want it to be. And brilliant, brilliant, brilliant interactions. I just love these second hours. They've been gold. Absolutely. And thank you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Alexander.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you for parallax.
God.
Thank you for everything.
Let's
We just love being in
this is just like every conversation that we have is sort of a beginning, even, it's the end, but it's the beginning. So
it's like having a party at the monastery. That's what it's like to be at parallax. Big love to you all, okay?